I'm Jeremy Strick, director of the Nasher Sculpture Center in Dallas. We're delighted to be here in New York tonight in generous partnership with the new museum to bring you this discussion, Public Figures. We extend our thanks to Andrew Westover, the Keith Haring Director of Education and Public Engagement here at the new museum, and to all of his team for working with us to organize tonight's talk, as well as to our moderator, Massimiliano Gioni, Edlis Neeson Artistic Director of the new museum, for the energy and imagination he has dedicated to shaping the conversation. Before the discussion begins, let me give you a bit of background on the Nasher Sculpture Center. The Nasher is a museum born from the collection gathered by a Dallas couple, Patsy and Raymond Nasher, who spent decades seeking out exceptional modern and contemporary sculpture that they believed to have paved a way for ever more imaginative modes of the art form. The original collection spans from the likes of Rodin to Calder to Magdalena Abakanowicz and Anish Kapoor. In addition to highlighting works from the permanent collection, the Nasher Sculpture Center also presents ambitious contemporary exhibition programming. Recent exhibition artists include Maitu Pere, Melvin Edwards, Michael Dean, Ronnie Horn, Betty Saar, and Carol Beauvais, to name a few. In the spirit of the Nasher's commitment to exploring the ongoing evolution of sculpture, in April 2015, the Nasher Prize was inaugurated, the most significant award in the world dedicated exclusively to the art form. It is presented annually to a living artist who has had an extraordinary impact on the understanding of sculpture. Each winner receives a $100,000 prize conferred in April of each year. Our laureates have included Doris Salcedo, Pierre Huyghe, Theastra Gates, Isa Genskin, Michael Rakowitz, and most recently, Nairi Baghramian. These laureates are selected by a jury that includes architect Sir David Adjaye, artist Philida Barlow, Guggenheim Curator at Large, Latin America, Brazil, Pablo León de la Barra, Lynn Cook, Senior Curator, National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C., Caroline Christoph Bakargiev, Director of Castello di Rivoli, Italy, art historian Brian E. Fair, Hu Hanru, Director of Maxi Rome, Yuko Hasegawa, Director, 21st Century Museum of Contemporary Art, Kanazawa, Japan, and Sir Nicholas Sirota, Chairman of Arts Council, England. Complementing the Nasher Prize is a series of public programs called Nasher Prize Dialogues, of which this discussion tonight is a part. These panel discussions, lectures, and symposia, made in partnership with other institutions around the world, such as the Reykjavik Art Museum, the Common Guild Glasgow, Museo Jumex, Mexico City, Akademie der Kunst, Berlin, the Institute of Contemporary Arts, London, and the Henry Moore Institute, are intended to foster international awareness of sculpture and to stimulate discussion and debate. Held in cities where the practice of sculpture seems especially vital and conversations around sculpture are especially resonant, the dialogue series offers engagement with various audiences, providing myriad perspectives and insight into the ever-expanding field. Tonight's talk, Public Figures, explores publicly cited figurative sculpture at a time when both public art and the role of figurative monuments are particularly charged in cultural discourse. We are thrilled to bring an exceptional panel of artists, Tania Bruguera, Hans Haacke, and Fred Wilson, together with Massimiliano Gioni, to discuss various critical approaches to these topics, including how their practices interrogate or antagonize the history and tradition of celebratory sculpture and representations of the human body within public space and institutions. Please join me in welcoming Tania Bruguera, Hans Haacke, Fred Wilson, and Massimiliano Gioni.
Thank you, Jeremy, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you for all the work that the Nasher does to preserve, promote, and reinvent what sculpture is. And it's really a wonderful museum, so it's a great honor to be here today with you as both guests and hosts. And we have an amazing lineup. I'm very, very proud and humble, and really thank you so much for coming out tonight. I also have to say it's my first panel in real life since 2020. It feels strange. It's our third panel in the museum in real life since 2020, personally my very first. And we actually have people also at home on stream, and so it's a very, new experience. I start doubting whether I exist or not, which maybe is relevant for also the panel tonight, as the title implies. We are here to discuss public art and publicly cited sculpture, and see how these three, I dare to say the word, geniuses of the practice have reinvented the way we conceive of sculpture and public art. We'll start with a few remarks from each of you, I believe, unless anything has changed in my absence. And we'll start off with Hans Haacke. We decided to cut the introductions because we really have a great group that is famous and literally doesn't need introductions, and I think we had their bios also running behind us. We start off with Hans Haacke, who is returning to this theater after a couple of years too. In fact, we had a wonderful exhibition with Hans, I believe in 2019. And so let's start off with you, Hans, and particularly we ask you to talk a little bit about one of your most recent and already legendary pieces, which is called Gift Horse, of which we can see some images in the back, which is an extraordinary reflection on what monuments can be in cities and their function and their meaning. And we also had the honor of hosting it on the 4th floor, so it's a sculpture that exists both in the public realm and within the walls of museums. So you want to tell us a little bit about this project?
I'll try. Let me preface what I'm saying that my memory is fading, and so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. The Gift Horse. I believe it was in 2014 that I was invited, together with 5 or 6 other artists from around the world, to make a proposal for the so-called fourth plinth on Trafalgar Square, where since, I believe, 1999 or so, every year an artist fills a plinth that was not occupied, let me put it this way, since sometime in the 19th century, with an equestrian statue, as it is customary on Trafalgar Square and many other places. I don't remember exactly why it was empty. One of the British kings or sons of British kings whose riding exercise there was supposed to be presented, it didn't come through.
I think it was the money to make the sculpture was not raised because the figure that was supposed to be celebrated was not loved.
Oh.
Which is interesting in the
Yeah.
context of
Yes.
responsibilities
Yeah,
of
yeah.
public figures. It was a missed fundraising opportunity because the person that was meant to be commemorated was not
There
loved.
were no
by-
packs who could do it.
There was no GoFund.
Okay, so so I came up with a proposal, and I never dreamt of it being accepted, but it was, and I did research on the site, its history, and then also research on what I what came to mind. And in the end, I made a proposal that a skeleton, rather than a normal sculpture of a horse, a skeleton of a horse should be presented there, because things normally are not good, but on the raised front leg of the skeleton should be a live ticker of the London Stock Exchange. And as I said, I didn't expect that this would be accepted, and particularly with the title Gift Horse. But the remarkable situation around the plinth is that the jury that decides whose proposal should be realized is in fact quite independent of the mayor, independent of all sorts of other authorities that might have a say, and certainly be not happy with a gift horse there. And so, lo and behold, I was asked to actually execute it. And then it was a question of how to do it. And I did further research and found that George Stubbs, when he was young, made prints of skeletons. His father was a bronze caster, and he knew about this. And I found a book in the library of Cooper Union, where I taught for 35 years, of George Stubbs' prints. And that was, in fact, what I pulled out and presented to people who can execute such things to work with. And they did. It was the skeleton was cast in a foundry in Philadelphia. It was quite remarkable. And of course, I'm not technically involved in these things or know about it. And I was surrounded, fortunately, with a lot of people who really knew the thing. And the gift horse was put together, was put on a boat and shipped to London, and put up on the plinth. And then it so happened that Boris Johnson, who is now the Prime Minister, however long it may take, Boris Johnson was the mayor at the time, and it was customary that the mayor would unveil whatever an artist had produced for this empty plinth. And he did. And I was there with my camera, and I was standing behind him, and I took a photograph of his white hair. He has a lot of hair, and he loves it, and he goes with his hand into his hair all the time. And it was just at the moment when the head of the gift horse was unveiled. And I remember him saying that it reminds him of the subway system of London that needs to be taken care of. And people on Trafalgar Square were rolling their eyes as far as I could see. And then the ticker was running, and everybody could see their fortunes.
So you were also a fortune teller of sorts in that occasion, no?
Oh, well, I couldn't predict what the stock market in London would do at the time. And of course, every time this work was exhibited somewhere else, including here at the New Museum, the local stock exchange, that in this case, the New York Stock Exchange ticker, was running and telling us how we are doing.
It's actually quite interesting that besides this presentation, it was never shown outdoors, no? It was shown at the New Museum, it was shown at the Haus der Kunst with Haacke Einwitzer, and I think those were all the presentations, but it's never been shown in a square. Do you think that has something to do with the exceptional opportunity that the fourth plane grants to artists? I mean, would it be met with more opposition if it were to be shown elsewhere?
Possibly, but what is fortunate with the fourth plinth, there is a plinth. You can't reach it. You can't damage it, or you really have to come with equipment to climb up there. But if it were in a public square here, you might have to have a guard there.
And thinking of Boris Johnson and actually thinking the very fact that it was realized, how for you as an artist, it's a bit like the Groucho Marx, no? That you never be a member of a club that would accept your nomination. How actually the realization of a piece that is so clearly critical, the very fact that it does get realized and installed in the public space, does that feel actually as a consecration of its force, or maybe a weakening of its potential? I don't even know if you really think about this.
Well, as I said, I was very surprised that it was accepted, but I was glad. Yeah. But maybe I should mention, I believe when it was here at the New Museum on the top floor during my exhibition, in the review in the New York Times, it was not mentioned.
Really?
I believe so.
Wow, that's more than a horse, it would be an elephant in the room.
Or if so, barely.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So I want to pass on the word to Fred, and we'll go back. Yeah. And Fred, you chose an image of a legendary project of yours, and you want to take us through.
Hello? Yes. Yes, and you can see how old it is. It's grainy. Wow. I was trying to think of public figures that I've done anything with, and there are a few, but very few. But anyway, so I figured I'd start with perhaps the first one, and while it was in a museum, and museums purport to be for the public, which can be, well, that's a whole other story. But anyway, in the Historical Society in Baltimore, looking around, I had the run of the whole museum to do whatever I wanted to do, but everything had to be on the third floor, and I didn't mess with other floors. So they had all these figures, these cigar store Indians that I can't say, since I'm a New Yorker, I've lost track of whether they're in front of any place anywhere else. But anyway, they're not here. But all throughout the museum, they had these figures, and so I collected them all and put them all together. However, they're all facing away from you, and the title I gave them individually was Portraits of Cigar Store Owners, because it really is not a portrait of any native person I've ever met. But anyway, And they're facing away, so you can't take in their images, and facing away. But what are they facing? They're facing. I asked the chief curator. I wanted to meet with the Native community in Baltimore, and she very seriously said to me, "Well, there are no Native people in Baltimore." So I went out and found the Cherokee, the Piscataway, and the Lumbee communities, and borrowed photographs of their families, some early ones and some more recent photographs. And they all came to the museum for the opening, never having ever stepped foot into that museum before. And that's kind of how the whole opening went, people who never stepped into that place before. Even the one in the far, that's your left, is by a, it's a portrait of his daughter. He used his daughter as the model, as the kind of, he was a German immigrant, and so that's, his Fräulein daughter as a native person. And so it went on from there. Behind the figure on the right was, before I got there, there was an exhibition of duck decoys, and it was a historical sighting. But anyway, what's on the wall? It was there for that show. It's the map of the Chesapeake Bay, and all the duck hunting clubs were on the map. So I said, well, why should I take that down? I just add the native tribes onto the map with the duck decoys. There are other things related to this, but this seemed to make sense within the context of this conversation.
Well, I want to ask you, in a sense, you most notably with this show, but also we'll see images from your 2003 Venice Biennale intervention and in many other projects, you have used the exhibition and the museum as almost as a medium, which is something that all of you have in common. Hans, most notably also in his own 93 Venice Biennale, he turned the container into a sculpture of sorts. So I want to ask you how you came to that idea, and what did you learn or what did you expose about museums in that practice and in many other of your interventions?
Well, I kind of, when I do these museum projects in museums, they're really, from my own experience working in museums, as I say, I was a guard at my college museum, and you sort of really get to know how people react in that space. And of course, you're invisible as a guard. And I'm there, but I'm invisible as a person. And what was I going to say about that? Well, and I really, really early on, when I after college or whatever, I would go to. I used to work in the Metropolitan and work in the Museum of Natural History in the education departments, freelance kind of way, and then I would go from there, from the class, usually back and forth between the two museums, and then go to my other job, which was running some community centers in East Harlem, But I was very intrigued by the fact that, in my relationship with the museum, I was a visitor. I was an artist that was looking at art, and it was a third thing that I was, and I can't remember now after all these years. But a visitor and a worker in the museum. So all these different roles that I played, sort of, kind of competed with each other, and different vantage points, different views that one would have of an institution because of who's looking, what's their background in relation to who's looking, and I've just found it very. There are many things that I got mad about in museums, as much as I love museums, because the perspective was very specific and just not everybody's perspective on the things that you look at and think about. And so from that point, I began to kind of interrogate institutions to really try to reveal what they were not saying, or that they didn't even know they were not saying, by making exhibitions with their collections, and never. This was the first one. Never expected anybody to invite me to do that. I was surprised after I did this one that anybody did after that. But that was not the case. So yeah, because when you realize or you have a perspective that's different, you can get really mad about these institutions that seem to be just erasing your, like there was no other perspective on it. And going from the Met to the Museum of Natural History where I work, sometimes, well, they do have similar collections. They talk about them in completely different ways. If we look at, Africa, Asia, Latin America, they have plenty of things, and they're sometimes the same things, but their focus is particularly very specific to their scholarship, and not a holistic view of an object or a history. So for the viewer who's coming to it without any critical eye, you assume that's it from that perspective. I mean, maybe you go as a kid to the Museum of Natural History, but you're not sort of taking it in the same way that you would take it in as an adult, and certainly across the park. If you go to both museums, it really becomes very clear that they have agendas and particular scholarship. And I love scholarship, but the idea that there's only one view of something, and they're so good at making you think one thing about something, and you go away and you think you know it, but you do not know it. So that really, really got me upset and angry, and so was from that. And I'm a very calm person, but that's my way of being angry, is to get in the museum and root around in the basements and presenting it to the public, a different perspective.
We'll probably go back to this question also after Tania speaks, but obviously the question of the museum as a public space. We have heard a lot most recently about public figure assuming in squares, in streets, but obviously museums, whether or not are public, particularly in the United States, is a very contentious question at the moment. And I don't know if you have any thought about it in relation to your work. I mean, now you're also a trustee. Does that change also the way in which you can apply pressure on museums? Or no, it's not a trick question.
I know it's not a trick question, but I mean, I have this passion for museums, and I want them to do better. And so yes, being on the board of the Whitney has, and for all these years, as many years as I have been, being only one person is it's a big job with institutions. I used to say museums changed glacially. Things got heated up after George Floyd, but my experience in museums and in different various levels is that people do have aha moments. If I'm being my positive self, that the majority want to, people don't want to change, but they do, when you put it in front of them, do try to be their better selves and step up if it's brought to their attention. And so that's what I find that I do in my way. And but the museums have really shifted and changed a great deal since I started. So I'm just a positive person and believe that they can change more, and they are changing more because of, well, at least the Whitney anyway, but the diversity of the staff and the diversity of the trustees, and of continuing trying to pressure and push those that aspect of their institution, and making them aware of just the sort of the minor little things that are conversations and social things that happen when you're just not aware of other people. You're in your bubble, and so that is shifting too. So I'm pretty happy about that. I remember my first meeting at the Whitney trustee meeting, and someone leaned over and said to me, "Oh, and who are you?" I said, "Well, I'm Fred Wilson." And he said, "You're not Fred Wilson." And I'm like, "Well, my mother told me I was Fred Wilson." But I mean, I didn't know that this guy made jokes. I mean, it was apparently a joke, but because he was talking about the venture capitalist Fred Wilson, who was, we joke about that now. He, not the trustee, but the other Fred Wilson and I joke about it. I don't think anybody's ever said, "You're not Fred Wilson" to him, but anyway, that's besides the point. So that was my first meeting, and it's actually, that was a good thing to happen in the beginning. It was just straight out, straight up at me, because then it meant I had to kind of step up and not just kind of sit back and Adam Weinberg and I are fast friends, so that we try to push these. I try to push these things with all the staff and the board, and I think they've been doing incredible work in the last few years.
Thank you. We'll actually speak a little more about museums in the next image by Tania. And with you, Tania, I think it's also inevitably, I think all of you are public figures yourselves, but with you, Tania, it's also inevitable to think also of the role of artist as a public figure, no? And maybe we'll have a chance to discuss that. But so you want to tell us a little bit about this project?
Yeah, well, I was called by Catherine Wood, who worked with me before, and to tell me, okay, you're going to do the next Turbine Hall. And I was very happy for a second. And then I was like, oh, Jesus, what am I getting into? So she's like, no, that's how everybody reacts. So it's normal. And so basically, the first thing I did is I look at all the history of all the previous Turbine Hall projects, and then I realized that what I wanted to do is a social engaged art project as a Turbine Hall project, which is basically an invisible project, something that nobody's going to see basically, but the institution itself. So basically that project in reality was a question I asked the institution, and the question was very simple. It was, the Tate Modern is one of the most important institutions in the art in the world. Are you as important for your neighbors? And then basically we created, I went there, I lived there for a long time, which was scary for people. Like, why is she still here? But I say, okay, if I'm going to do this project with the neighborhood, I have to be here. I have to have a day-to-day relationship with them. And basically, we created a group called Tate Neighbors, which already exists. It still exists now. And basically, we went around the Tate and we saw different organizations or people. And the Tate Neighbors, which is all the people there, were people who, for example, some of them never ever, I'll tell you, that the lady with the cane, she lived next to the Tate, literally, one of the buildings, kind of old buildings, and she has never stepped in the Tate. But you had other people, for example, the tall guy here, who actually was part of the staff. And you have the guy next to it is part of the group who was critiquing the Tate during the relation with the BP. So that was a little scary for the institution when I invite them, they were very, very critical. But basically, I didn't know what I was going to do. And I have to say the Tate was very cool with that. Like, not knowing what the project was, just I was meeting every day with these people. Every day we met and discussed. And then one day we start talking about how it has changed in our culture, the idea of recognizing somebody, and how people now do a little cut and pay for recognition. And before, when you had buildings named after people, it's because they did something amazing, not because they pay so much money. And basically, there was a big controversy with the person who gave £100 million for the name of the new building. And we decided that what we wanted was to name the building that is in front. So you have the Blavatnik here, you have the actual hall, turbine hall, and then you have this other building. That building was called, I don't know, the machine building. I don't know, it was like some. So we say, okay, we want to rename this building. And we decided to name it after Natalie Bell, who is the person next to me, laughing, very happy. And the way we selected her was after many, many discussions. We wanted to find a person that was good to the neighbor. And then she has been working for 25 years as a social worker. She worked with kids at risk. And thanks to her work, she saved some of these kids who now are studying and so on. And now she works with elders. And she was really, really loved by the community. But it's one of these invisible people that nobody sees. So one of these public figure that is not public. And we decided to do this, to put the name. I have to acknowledge that Frances Morin was amazing. She was really plotting with us, which was very great. And actually they lost £100 million because this job, because this piece, because I think that the development department didn't like my project because they couldn't sell it to somebody. So, but I think that's the kind of project that I was very proud, because after we finished, we had not only created a process in which the neighbors talk to the director and all the people there about what they find work and doesn't work in a very candid way. And at the same time, it was very beautiful one moment, because the people who work in the museum, they didn't want to do the job because they didn't know who was it, because it was a secret until the last day who was the person, to make it, to make something, exciting. And as soon as they were explained who the person was, in less than 24 hours, the whole building had the new labels. Everybody was super excited, so that was quite beautiful. And then at the end of the project, of course, I wanted to do, let's say, an invisible sculpture, a sculpture that is in your hand and your heart, like something that is not to touch or to see, but to feel, no? And I also wanted to ask the institution, can the institution feel? Can you feel? Can you feel your neighbors? Can you feel the people who are working in this place? And at the end, I learned a word that is legacy. I didn't know this word before. And it's because Frances Morris came and said, okay, we need legacy. So the legacy of this project is not only we're going to put the name, but it's going to stay there forever. I don't know how forever means there, but it's been still there. But at the same time, everybody was very happy. But I said, you know what? Only do metaphors and stuff is not enough. So I say, what we need is to have Natalie Bell, who is part of the neighborhood, who is not trained as an artist or anything like that, to be in the trustee and in the trustee board. So now Natalie Bell is sitting there, and she is part of the decision-making process when there is a project or something like that. So I think...
But that's not, technically, that is not a lifetime.
Well, she's there for a while.
Yeah.
And they love her. So I don't know. I don't know how that works. But, there are certain, and this, there are certain works, and you also know this, there are certain works that you do it in such a way that if they take it away, it's a problem.
Yeah. Well, case in point, maybe we can look at the next project by Hans, which they try to take away, the Reichstag. Can we see? So do you want to tell us about this project, which is still in Berlin, still in the Parliament building, and how did it start? and how it nearly didn't happen. No?
Oh, it did.
Yeah, but it nearly didn't by
yeah,
two votes.
yeah,
no?
yeah, right,
So-
right. Well, when East and West Germany was reunited, eventually the Reichstag, the building where the German parliament was meeting since sometime late in the 19th century, was reconfigured to house the Bundestag, the current German parliament. And in the late 90s, artists from many countries, if I remember well, from the countries that occupied Germany after the Nazis were defeated, were invited, including some German artists, for to come up with ideas for permanent installations in the building. And when much of it was decided or even installed, one of the artists, and I don't remember who, didn't come through, and then I was invited to fill the gap, and the gap was in the northern open-air courtyard. And as I often do, I study the history and look at what happened there and so forth. And I learned that the inscription on the building, which was built sometime in the late 19th century, as I mentioned before, was very controversial at the time, in the sense that the emperor, Kaiser, did not want a dedication on its facade saying to the German people, because he thought it was, in a way, putting him aside. And so for quite a while, this proposal for the dedication was not realized. And during the First World War, and I believe it was 1917, when things were not too well for the German army, somebody persuaded the Kaiser that perhaps it would be good now to dedicate this to the German people. And grudgingly, he agreed. And then the letters needed to be designed, and somebody, I can't think of his name right now, a very, very important graphic designer came up with the lettering, which is a mixture of the old Fraktur and Latin letters that we quite familiar with and read all the time. The old Fraktur is a little bit like the New York Times call it font.
Yeah,
Yeah.
masthead or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. And then very significantly, I read that the letters that were supposed to go up there were produced in a foundry in Berlin, which was managed and owned by a Jewish family. And it was installed eventually, and then as the sad German history, most of the members of this family did not survive the Nazi period. When I was invited to participate in, when I was invited to fill in the northern open air courtyard, I visited Berlin. I knew it, of course, I visited the site, and I saw that it looked different than it looks today. That on the weekends in the grass in front of the building, families were hanging out with their kids and playing and eating and so forth. And most of them were Turkish. And Germany, at that time, there was a very large immigration of Turkish and also Southern European people. They came to work in Germany. It was not refugees as it is these days. And of course, and at that time, there was already some resistance to non-Germans. Nationalism was coming up as it has many other countries. And so I thought in order to somehow address the social political situation that I encountered, I wanted to juxtapose with my proposal the dedication to the German people, which originally was not, did not have a nationalist connotation, was one that made it clear that it is not exclusively the Germans and their fate, but everyone who lives in the country is being governed and by the parliament. And I came up with the idea to dedicate it to the population, der Bevölkerung, everyone who lives in the country. And by that time, I believe 10% of the population in Germany or more was already non-German born. And I submitted the proposal, and the committee that made these decisions, or the members of the parliament, was mostly for it, with the exception of 2 members. But they voted, because it was the majority, to accept it and have it realized. And the 2, and particularly one of them, a member of the Christian Democratic Party, was very upset, and using the rules of the German parliament, he demanded that it should be decided by the entire membership of the parliament. So there was a debate of the entire parliament about this, and a vote eventually. And it passed by a slim majority of 2 votes. The Christian Democratic Party totally voted against it, with the noticeable exception of two women, both Christian Democrats, a former speaker of the party, and a Bavarian representative from Nuremberg. And then it was in fact realized. And my proposal was that not only in the same typeface as the dedication on the facade, it be der Bevölkerung, to the population, and that members of the German parliament be invited to bring 100 pounds of soil from their constituency to the courtyard and drop it around the dedication. And some did, mostly from the Social Democratic Party and from the Green Party, but also a few others. And eventually, after many years, also members of the Christian Democrats. In 2008, I took a photograph of what happened with the soil. It contained lots of seeds, maybe naturally or actually seeded by the members of parliament, knowing what might happen. And it grew up. And later on, there was a chestnut tree and other big, the chestnut tree actually was very tall during a year, I don't remember when it was very, very dry, it died, and there was not, the soil was not deep enough but it's still growing, so it's an ongoing thing. And now the opposition has sort of calmed down, and about 300 members of parliament have brought soil and seeds.
You know, there is a recurring theme that your pieces need to be voted in favor or against, which is ironic because you started, I mean, famously, you made art with polls. So I don't know if it's some kind of compensation, but kidding aside, you know, we have seen in the previous administration, you know, a clear effort in America to determine what type of buildings get built and what type of, I mean, it didn't go as far as monuments, but a regulation of the public space. So, you know, here we have an example of that probably only in Germany could happen, that such a monument is approved and voted in favor. But I wonder if all of you have any thought about making art by approval or by vote, and what are also the dangerous implications of that, that, you know, with the wrong majority, we could have squares that are filled with the most frightening products of human imagination. And I don't know if it's something that you go about thinking in your own work. Not so much, or
The piece at the Tate, it was voting.
Yeah.
I didn't know, I had no control who the person was going to be. So I had no control. It was like they decided. Yeah. I mean, they had to present the candidates, everybody voted. Very democratic. Yeah.
I guess several of my public commissions have, you know, from a body on high, just sort of decides whether they want it or not. And anything that is somewhat, you know, uncomfortable, either they didn't notice within the piece, or but yeah, so yeah, it's kind of something with public art that there ends up being a certain body of people that decide on and public commission. I mean, private commissions too, whether they like it or not, and you're not sure of how much they understand it or not. But yeah, but I haven't had that kind of experience with the work. Well, what am I saying? That's not true. I have things that never got made, so that was another.
But do you, speaking of public commissions, or do you take into account that that's a possibility that the work will not be realized, and how does it feel in contrast to the work you do in the studio or the work that you? We'll talk about this in a second, but you know, are you ready to compromise, or is compromise a fact when it comes to public art?
I never get so well, that's a different story. If I never get so in the conversations with people, and as the project comes to fruition, never do I change my project. You know, it's either, if it's, I really think, you know, it's important to me, but of course with public art sometimes you have to massage it in certain ways, but practical ways, not necessarily, you know, philosophical or, you know, other ways. But you always, if there is any kind of, you know, as Hans was saying, any kind of manipulation does change the work, and you just have to be really cognizant of, you know, is it still in there, whatever you're basing your desire to do on. And so that's just a conversation one has with themselves.
And here we're looking at images of your 2003 American Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, which I assume and believe it's actually vetted by some kind of jury, no? Were you aware of the process that led your project to be chosen, and was there any friction around it?
The artist, the curator, oddly in the United States, unlike other countries, the artist is not chosen directly. It's the curator that gets chosen.
That's why I moved to America.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you should do the Biennale then. You really, you know. But yeah, you, of course, you produce the proposal, and it's the curator that's chosen, oddly enough. And so I'm sort of a little separated from that part of it. Of course, there's, you know, the court of public opinion later, but with the project, it's really they're choosing the curator or the institution, and that's a whole other conversation about how that's somewhat problematic.
Which institution presented this pavilion?
What's that?
Which institution did you make the pavilion with?
This was Fred. Come on. It was Boston. It was MIT.
Uh-huh.
The
Veralist Center.
Yes. Yeah. But the thing was, since she was chosen, we had a proposal. You know, proposal is sometimes not in fullness of the project, especially when it's, you know, varied spaces. And I hadn't started it or anything. I mean, you apply for these things, and maybe you get it, maybe you don't. So I didn't think it, you know, entirely through all the different parts of what I would do. In fact, I just have to be a fanboy once. My favorite, you know, pavilion was Hans's. I mean, it blew me away. But anyway, I just had to do that. That was earlier. I didn't have to compete with that. But so, you know, I loved Venice and had been there many times before, and decided that to propose something about the Africans of Venice, because I saw this is in 2003, a real disconnect in the reality as opposed to the fictive idea of what was Venice at that time. So and since I had been, and being African American, you do notice African Americans in art and people and all that, and so this gave me a great opportunity to sort of delve into it much deeper. And really, at the time, if you ask most Italians, they would say they didn't think there was any population of Africans there besides the Senegalese selling bags and things like that. But for me, it was a really deep connection that people were just not sort of seeing. It wasn't part of their reality. And so, but if you go to the academia, the Veronese has about 10 or 5 or 6 Africans in the painting. In the Carpaccio, this is a fabulous gondolieri, African gondolieri, and there's a second one. And many of the major painters, painting what they saw in the scene, the city scene. So for at the time, for me, everyone thought this was a new phenomenon, seeing Africans, around. But in fact, it went back, to 1500, 14, So, and for various reasons why they were there. Of course, there's nothing about them anywhere, and that's a whole other project for a historian. But so I went around sort of collecting images and thoughts about the Africans of Venice because I wanted them to be visible. I saw them, and of course, I got to know a lot of the bag sellers, these Senegalese guys, and wanted to put them in context, with the history there, and make as a place that is not as foreign as most Italians thought they were. So the project ran the gamut of imagery and ideas related to that. This is just as you walk into the building, and these are from far away. People thought that these were actual statues there, but they were scrims, just like so much Venice covered with scrims when they when they're working on a building, and these 2 characters are 2 of 4 characters from the Frari Church in Venice, of these huge figures holding up a Doge's tomb, and so I just had them reproduce and have them holding up, Stati Uniti d'America, and of course I love the connection between. People would ask me, oh, well, they think, oh, Fred's doing something about American slavery. And I'm like, well, no. And so and from that, there were other things on the outside of the building as well. But from that, this connection between, the Republic of Venice and the Republic of the United States were not too far apart in this aspect of history. Very different environments and different reasons for being there, but it was a way for me to kind of just start it off. People thinking it's America, it's not America. What is this? And for the Venetians to sort of perhaps recognize something that certainly the thing for Venetians is that just doing anything about Venice was really a big deal. I made the first big chandelier in there. And that the folks in Murano just went wild. But anyway, so the whole project, it was public figures. I thought that's why this particular image would be of interest in this topic. But the whole project was about this the Africans of Venice, from the early centuries to today.
Well, and the notion also that the exhibition makes, rather than making public art, you're making things public, and which is also what was happening in mine in the museum, and which is ultimately, I think, what public art does. No, it's not just public because it's in a shared space, but because it makes certain ideas or people visible and public. And Tania, do you want to look? I don't know how we're doing with time, and if you're still with us, maybe we can look at your project, which was also part of your commission at the Tate.
I asked that question to the institution, but I asked a question to myself when I was doing the project. And the question I asked myself is, can a social engaged project like social sculpture can be just done for one person? Because many times we think about social art or social engaged art or whatever you want to call it, or public art for the masses, and the more people are related to the work, supposedly more successful the work is. But I really wanted to do the opposite, like having all these people in the neighborhood just working for one person. So that's that's one of the ideas. And then I did this other project, which is not very clear here, but basically this is an art piece, let's say a sculpture or whatever you want to call it, a social experiment, which is a piece that is actually talking about Facebook. This is an artwork I created thinking about Facebook and social media, and taking this idea of virtue signaling. I mean, I'm an activist, so I get really pissed off when people just click, and they don't do anything else. So I really was mesmerized by this idea of people feeling good with the world and with themselves just by showing they are good people, but not doing it. So I just wanted to say, okay, this is a piece about people crying for no reason, but they're crying, so they care, right? But you don't have the subject of the care. And this is, you enter the space, and then there is this chemical in the space that make you automatically cry.
So it's the opposite of a crowd pleaser. It's
exactly.
The opposite of a blockbuster.
Exactly. And the interesting is people start looking at each other. So it's like the piece is the people crying, no? And then it's all this competition to see who cries more, which is, it always goes that way. And no matter what art you want to do, it always goes that way. But I think it was for me very, very interesting to materialize this feeling, of behaving in a way without feeling the behavior, without having the cause for such reaction. And also it's an interesting piece because every time I install it, I've installed it 3 times now. Every time I install it, I have to change the mechanism, because I learn more and more about the chemistry, and I learn more and more about system of ventilation and ways to bring it. So it's the only piece I've done that I have to rethink the technology all the time, because it's progressing. I have to say the first one was very like a piece of metal with a little tube thing. It was very primitive, Now it's a little more sophisticated, the last version. So I think it was in this piece for me was about this, but also about how people see each other, how the audience become the object of the piece, So
I don't want to put you on the spot, but obviously you mentioned your activism, and you've been embattled in a bit of a adventure with your native country. I want to ask you how you, both as an artist and as an individual, how do you live your public responsibility and public life, and how does that intersect with your work? I mean, we do have an image of also Tatlin Whisperer.
we did.
Yeah, I got one. Yeah,
I didn't bring it.
I brought it. Can we talk about it? Or
Okay, yeah.
can we have those 2 images of?
Yeah.
They are in the last miscellaneous. So
this is one of them. Yeah. So basically, I suck at it because I think, to be honest,
you don't want to talk about it.
No.
anymore?
I mean, now I went to therapy already, so it's okay. So no, I really came back from Cuba in a very, very bad shape, I have to say. I was walking in Cambridge, and I saw a little car. Like it was very scary, like a little car coming very slow, at night, and I was like, oh shit, they're here. And then I had to go to therapy. I'm like, okay. We say in Cuba, you are not paranoid when you really are persecuted, you know? So basically, it's very. I'm very pleased to say that things have changed since I did that piece, because then I was like a crazy lady, you know, saying things that upset the government. But I think now we have a huge movement of artists who are, I mean, one day one young artist was complaining. I say, please don't complain. You don't know what it's being alone doing this. Now you have all your friends, you know, saying like it's going well, you know. But right now the situation is quite bad, because not only they are forcing people to leave the country, and we have the biggest migration since the 90s. We have 78,000 people living in 1 month, and they live anywhere. They go anywhere. They go any country that doesn't ask for a visa. So you have Cubans now in Russia, in Serbia, anywhere in the world that doesn't ask for visa for Cubans. And it's really bad, because now they're putting everything in the law. So basically, on maybe you know, 11th of July, the whole people went out. There was a small group who went out and did like this Facebook direct thing, and all the people saw it, and it's like, oh, okay, let's do it. And then immediately the whole country, it was the biggest demonstration in Cuba, in the whole history of Cuba. And it was in all the country. And the way the Cuban government responded was putting sentences up to 30 years. Just to go out in the street and say freedom, and we are not afraid, and leave to the government. And right now we have several kids. The number is not clear. Some people say 50, some people say 75, 100, underage, who have been condemned. There is one kid who was 17 when he was arrested. He was detained, and he was condemned to 18 years. So he has more years condemned in prison than the years he has lived. So this is a kind of horror that we're living now. And of course, it's a construction for people to be afraid, no? So I think it's very tough right now for us. And there is the new penal code that is going to be approved in a few weeks, but they already show it. And for the first time, before we had only one legal element that put you into ¿cómo se llama? Pena de muerte, death sentence, which is betrayed the country, which is normal. Everybody has this. But now in the new penal code, we have up to 6 new possibilities for them to condemn you to death. Then this is very scary for us right now. So things have changed. We hope to change it again. I just came back 2 days ago from Europe, because I met with the European Parliament's MPs and with some of the people from foreign relations, from European Union, and we're doing all this advocacy also for them to demand them to release all these prisoners, because they've done nothing. We have more than 1,200 people in jail just for this, and some of them have been condemned in groups. They take 12, 15 people and they all sentence them in groups. So this is very extreme, I think. But this means that the work the activists did in Cuba was really good. If the only thing they have is violence, There is no dialogue. We ask for dialogue. They defame us in the public TV. We have all our some WhatsApp things and signal on national TV, our numbers and the address. For example, I do a project in Cuba called Star, and they put the Google map and the address with this Tejadillo 214, where it was. So people go there with hate, So it's quite intense. But I think people are now very clear that the myth of the Cuban Revolution is gone. People don't support it. The government don't care, and it's very corrupt. You know, you have all these people really doing 8 hours of line for food, and then you have these people in power with this big. The other day, I saw a photo of all the people in the nomenclature, you know, and they were very big like this, and the meme says obstetrician clinic because they look like they have like big, you know. No, it's very. The only thing we have is this joking, no, like making joke about this. And now they're doing performance. May 1st, I saw some images they're doing performance. They're so bad at it. The government is doing performances. Really? Yeah, because they know this is a technique we use, you know, doing performances and actions and stuff. And now they do it, but it was so bad. I don't know who was the giving advice, really. It's not very good artist. Or maybe they thought it was easy to do performance. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's the right note on where to end this conversation, but because we have such a great lineup, I wanted to see if the audience has any question. I don't think it's a common opportunity to have such great artists together, and so and nice people too, as far as we know from below the mask. So I don't know if there is any question.
Yeah, it's funny because they were telling me they want me to leave. They want me to leave. At some point, they said, if you don't have money to buy the ticket, this is the government agents, you know. If you don't have money to buy the ticket, don't worry, we'll put you on the plane. And I'm like, no, I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave. So it was like this for like, I don't know, many months, many months, almost 6 months. And then some of our colleagues were in prison after the July 11, and there were like 48 of them. So it was 24 of the group 27N, which I'm part of this group of artists who is a new movement called 27 of November, which is the day we went in front of the Ministry of Culture. And also there were kids in prison. There were also independent journalists in prison. And there were some artists in prison. So I made a list together with all the activists who gave me all the names. And then I say, now I never talked to them. They talked to me in interrogation. And the longest interrogation I had consecutively was 11 hours. It was very intense. But I decided to do a performance, so I didn't talk. And Hamlet, a friend of ours, was in prison. And every time I say, okay, every time they mention Hamlet, I'm going to say he's a great artist. And then she was really out of her comfort zone because she was asking me stuff and telling me horrible things, like my mom died very recently, and she was talking about my mom like she was alive, and now you go home and she's going to talk to you. Like they use everything. And I was like this, like I'm a performer. Concentration in the respiration, like I was like, oh my. And then they say, Hamlet, say, he's a great artist. He's a great artist. Because also the other thing, they film you all the time. They have hundreds of hours of me talking or interrogation. And I knew this, so I didn't want them to use it on TV. And yeah, at one point she was like, yes, I know, he's a great artist. And then she realized it's wrong. It's like, but why? He's a great artist. Yeah, but it was quite intense. So I never called them, but I found another activist who have their number. And I say, tell them I want to talk to them. And then I say, okay, you want me to leave? Yes, when are you leaving? When are you leaving? I'm like, no. You want me to leave, but I leave in exchange of you. And then I gave a list. Of course, they didn't release all of them. There were 3 of them. They said this is not on our jurisdiction because it's already going higher. Like they are negotiating with the United States, basically, some of these people. And they released like 24, which is not a lot, but they always do that, so you don't feel good. They never let you feel good, and I'm doing a new piece about that, about how feel half good, And I want to be there, but to be honest, I exceed all the possibility of doing anything. I was since the 16th of November until 27th of August in house arrest. Without internet, without people visit me very little when they wanted. There was a person who worked with us in Instar, and she was literally dragged on the floor like this to not go to the house. It was a situation that I don't like, which is being a victim. I never allowed them to put me in a victim seat, and that they were doing this, Like I arrived and a friend of mine told me like, oh, I was bored already because every day is the same, no? The police in the door, so they do that too, They tire people, And I realized I was more effective outside temporarily. And so but now they don't let us go back, which is interesting. So we are preparing this action where a lot of us are going to go back the same day. We'll see, but I cannot say more about that. Yeah.
Wait for the microphone.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here and hear you all. I had a question, but at first I just wanted to say an observation is that you all share this idea of bringing visibility to people that aren't visible, whether or not they're neighbors or even Germans having the sign or Africans in Venice. But I wanted to ask about scale, actually, because with public art, I guess one assumes largeness. And I loved the I love the kind of miniature, intimate places of your work. And I was wondering if that's just something you thought about, like bringing the soil, like bringing a square of soil, seemed very intimate and almost like a detail, but very poignant. And then can a sculpture feel, like it seems to bring it to a different scale. So I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, the 2 works are very different. One is a traditional sense sculpture. Was put on a plinth, as all the other sculptures on Trafalgar Square are. The other one is what one now calls a work in progress. And when I put a caption to a photograph, I say 2000, which is the year when it was inaugurated, and then a hyphen. It is ongoing. And it is changing. And in the beginning, it was, as I mentioned, only members of some parties who participated. And in the meantime, there are others. But then, of course, there are also parties that, like the AfD, the the right wing, the new right wing party, which is in parliament, who, of course, will not bring soil to add to the vegetation in the courtyard. I'm not sure whether this really answers your question, but I'm glad to. I would be glad to carry on if you have a.
So I think in my case, I always avoid the idea of the public as a generic being, as a generic subject, and I try to see how many different audiences exist for a project, for the same project. And of course, when I had to do the turbine hall, I almost became crazy because this is 2 million people who see the work and pass by, and there's so many different. There is from the tourists that stay there for a little bit because it's one day in London, to the neighbor, to the person who works there, for which the institution is also an ongoing relationship, aesthetic relationship. And with these kids that goes from the school to, so I had to imagine all the potential audience that exists in order to understand what kind of reaction the work was going to have, so I'm always trying to do that. But I liked also the idea to understand the public projects as a personal experience very much, not as a mass where you imagine everybody reacting the same, So I think this is for me very important because it's not what you see, it's what you see is making you feel or think about. And not everybody has the same history, Yeah.
When do you think it's beneficial to remove a public monument? Not one of yours, of course.
Well, also the tricky thing is mainly contemporary artists don't get commissioned for permanent monuments. No, it's mainly you get commissioned for temporary monuments, which I guess it's a form of modesty that contemporary culture brings to history, but it's very rare. No, I don't know if. Well, yours is a permanent monument at the Reichstag. Yeah, yes. Yeah, but it's I think very infrequent. But, so you want to answer the question of when you think it's appropriate to remove a monument, and you want to take the mic. But
it's an interesting question, and I'm very glad that so many monuments are gone now. Didn't really expect it in my lifetime, but anyway, there's this. I just don't want it to be a complete erasure of what happened and what that represented and how ubiquitous it was and still is in some places, but because sometimes I've been in cities and there's an empty plinth, and it reminded me that I didn't, when I first started going there, I didn't realize the kind of insidiousness of it, street names and not just monuments, and so it to me it's a double-edged sword. I don't want it. I don't want the idea of this point, this thing in history happened. I don't want to Disneyfy the past, On the other hand, it's extreme. I can't even imagine living underneath certain images if you're at all, have any knowledge of history, with things that are completely against you, and have been very degrading to people that you would know, and they're still there, just as if it's as if they're not as if they're not there. But yeah, somehow, and maybe it's a different moment, where the moment of removal, which is great, and that it's happening, and but what to do with them is a whole other issue. But also the kind of remembering or not forgetting, that what these were memorializing happened even farther in the past, and were not these public monuments were not made at the time of the individuals who they were talking about, were they of. They were not around. This was a later moment of resurgence, or just of desire for that time to come back again. And so I'm really glad that they're gone, and that the next step is to kind of try to understand and try to know how to have the double-edged sword of a way to access the information, the knowledge, and not let it just act like there was nothing happening, or it happened so long ago you wouldn't even know that anybody you knew would know about it. So it's an ongoing process, I think. But removal is, that is the good thing.
Is there time for one more question, or maybe not? Well, thank you so much. This was really an honor, and